area. We've been working on this for a long time, and I'm going to hand it over to our Deputy Director of Housing and Homelessness, Lisa Huval. Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. One of the most important findings that came out of this report was that the number of rental households with extremely low incomes has increased, while the supply of rental units affordable to them has decreased. As a result, more households are struggling, and as affordable housing has become less available, homelessness has increased. From 2013 to 2019, street homelessness in Albuquerque nearly quadrupled, from 144 to 567 people. And as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to exacerbate housing instability among those vulnerable households. As the mayor said, last year we asked the Urban Institute to assess the housing needs of renter households with extremely low incomes and people experiencing homelessness. They did a two-part analysis. The first part was a quantitative analysis to estimate gaps in affordable housing for renter households and supportive services. And the second part consisted of interviews with government officials, nonprofit developers, housing service providers, to get their perspective on affordable housing and homelessness issues in Albuquerque and recommendations on how we could address them or address those issues. Some of the main findings from this report include that the supply of rental housing affordable to renter households with extremely low incomes is shrinking. From 2006 to 2010, and then from 2012 to 2016, the number of rental units increased by about 8,400, but the number of rental units affordable to renter households with extremely low incomes decreased by 700 units. At the same time, the number of rental households with extremely low incomes is increasing. In 2012 to 2016, or 22,300 renter households had extremely low incomes, a 9% increase from 2006 to 2010. Households with extremely low incomes make up 1 in 4 rental households. More than 40% of rental units that are affordable to households with extremely low incomes are occupied by households with higher incomes. Of the 6,900 rental units affordable to rental households with extremely low incomes, about 3,000, or 43%, are occupied by renters with higher income. 9 in 10 renter households with extremely low incomes are rent burden. This includes 82% of households whose monthly rent is more than half of their monthly income. More than 4,700 assisted units, meaning these are currently affordable units, could lose their subsidy within the next 10 years. The report estimates that 2,200 Albuquerque households need permanent supportive housing. This is a combination of rental assistance and supportive services that we know is a best practice for helping people who are experiencing homelessness with disabilities exit homelessness and stay housed. The Urban Institute found that overall, the city has a gap of 15,500 units of affordable housing for renters with low incomes. I found the results of this report to be very sobering, but they also offered some clear recommendations and a path forward on how we could begin to meet the true need for affordable housing in our community. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol Pierce, Director of Family and Community Services, to talk about what those recommendations are and our strategy for moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think based on the information you heard from Lisa in the Urban Institute report, it is sobering. It is really a call to action here in our community. We can do better, and we can take very specific action steps together to make a difference in our community. So based on the report, there were some recommendations that we will take to address strategies to impact homelessness and affordable housing. So developing an inclusive process for a shared vision in our community to increase housing affordability and reducing homelessness. We need to strengthen leadership and coordination on affordable housing initiatives, and our department would play a key role in leadership providing that. We need to close that very sobering gap that we learned about, 15,500 renters with extremely low income we need to preserve those affordable units, and we need many more. So that includes affordable housing development support, pairing developments with ongoing rental subsidies, and preserving those affordable units where we have federal subsidies and those may be expiring. So we need to expand also rental assistance and renter protections. It's very important. So most important, the city cannot do this alone. We want to be a major partner, but it will take collaboration with other partners to do this. It will take the county, it will take UNM, and more to realize these very important goals here in our community. So to that end, the Homeless Coordinating Council that the mayor has mentioned will be developing an action plan this summer to really carve the path forward for our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Carol and Lisa. And, for us, this has been an issue that has been with us for some time. I think when we came in, we tried to understand that, look, the kind of one-off approach of having a, particular pilot program or, 10 more units of housing, these things just aren't getting it done. And I think really what this report reflects is that this needs to continue to be a top priority for the city and the county. And so it's just something that we have to acknowledge and we have to work on. This is not going to go away because of anything you name, whether it's Corona or whatever challenge. This is an American challenge and we're not in any way immune from it. Okay, let me also just mention too that it does underscore the work that we've got to continue to execute on the concept of the Gateway Center or a couple of Gateway Centers, and we've got to get that done. So we're, again, still committed to that, and we're excited that now we're joined by some city councilors on the working group and the county commissioners. So we appreciate council and the county commissioners for joining in that effort. Okay, I think with that, we can take a few questions.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one here from Ryan Laughlin at GOV. Where are we in the process of picking a location for the Gateway Center? And do you prefer the center be located around the Coronado Park area?
So the question is, where are we at on the Gateway Center, and a question about preferences. Let me just say, my first preference was this UNM site, and my second thought has been really around the old Loveless Hospital. But I think my preferences are not the only thing that matters, because this now is going to be handled by our working group with the county and the city councilors. So of course, we'll have a say and be involved, but it's important that we come together in agreement with our county commissioners and our city councilors on that. And so this group will be working to answer really that question. And I think the other thing I would just share with respect to that is, for us, I just want to make sure that we are solving the problem. I'm not particularly hung up on where it is or if there's, 1, 2, or 3 sites. I just want to see the concept of these Gateway Center or centers being available because we know that the need is there. That's what I'm focused on.
Thank you. One more from Ryan Laughlin. Advocates for the homeless say repeat offenders and are victimizing legitimately homeless people without consequences at Coronado Park. There have been 2 homicides there recently. Is the city doing anything to address the continued and recent spike of violent crime there?
So as it has been now for almost a decade, Coronado Park can be a very dangerous place. What we are doing is now on a daily basis, we continue to go in with our support teams. These are civilians who try and offer help. And we try and get everyone who's at Coronado to go to a shelter or to go to our shelter, even overnight. That's really important. Now, some of these individuals don't want to go, and so unfortunately they're there when some different things can happen. So we continue to do what we can with respect to increased presence, but we also want to make sure that for the folks who are not involved in any illegal activity, that we're respecting their constitutional rights, and that's why, again, they're still there. Now, for us, with respect to the most recent transactions, I would ask to follow up with APD on the specifics of what's happened there. And some of them might not necessarily be homeless related, even though they occurred near Coronado Park. But for details on that, I would check over with our police department.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one here from Jessica Dyer at the Albuquerque Journal. She's saying that a lot of this data in the report is at least 4 years old. Do you think its findings would be different with newer data?
You know, the age of data in all things homelessness has actually been a frustration point for me, which is why we decided to start taking action and not waiting for a report. So, you know, we actually wanted to do this report for a long time, then it took a long time to get done, but we didn't wait. So I think the good news is it just confirms the direction we're going in, and I think the new data would just say the same thing, but say the challenge is even bigger.
Thank you. One more from Dyer.
Anything else you want to? Okay.
One more from Jessica Dyer. How many housing vouchers has the city funded in fiscal year 2020?
The question is around housing vouchers, which again is one of our key components to getting folks into housing and how many we funded. I'll let Carol, Lisa try and answer that. I know we can get you a specific answer. I'm not sure if they have one off the top of their head.
Yeah, about 900 vouchers.
Okay, about 900 so far from Lisa Hubal.
Thank you. Okay, last one from Dyer right now. How much money does the city have available through past bond elections and state appropriations, et cetera, for affordable housing?
So there is a chunk, the question is about affordable housing and how much money that we have. And what I'll do is ask Carol or Lisa if they want to kind of chime in on that. I know there was a chunk in the last session. We got some money in capital outlay just in February, and we very much want to keep that. We are worried it's going to be swept up or taken to fix state budget issues, and I think this is just a good example where we want to keep that amount. And do you remember some of the dollar amounts?
2.5 million is correct.
That was the 2.5 million that we desperately need as a city, and so we're hoping our legislators can defend that and that this helps make the case that we desperately need that money. Anything else you want to add?
Voters approved $5 million in workforce housing bonds in November.
Why don't you, that's good, go ahead.
So voters did approve $5 million in workforce housing bonds as part of the November 2019 election. So we have those $5 million available to construct affordable housing. And then there is also a remaining amount from previous bonds for workforce housing. And Jessica, I can follow up with you and let you know that exact amount.
We'll work on our little booster stool here for Lisa. All right, you'll be ready next time.
Thank you. Another question here from Peter Rice of the Downtown Albuquerque News. Some jurisdictions like Minneapolis and Oregon have all abolished the single-family zone in an effort to increase the supply of affordable housing via more duplexes and casitas. Do you support doing that in Albuquerque, and do you support the inclusionary zoning area that the report recommended taking a look at?
So there's a lot in that question. Some of it's about do we support some of the recommendations in the report about the inclusionary zone. We do. That's very much something we want to look at, and this team's going to be investigating. We always look at what other cities are doing. There was a mention of kind of some Portland activities and so forth around multi-unit versus single-unit housing. And just want you to know that, you know, we actually, and this is what's great about having Carol and Lisa, we always look at those, and then we always look at our own housing stock. So I just want to highlight that, you know, we're actually fortunate in Albuquerque that we have relatively cheap housing, and in this case, I'm referring to rental rates. And a lot of these other cities, they have this other challenge, right, where housing vouchers are so expensive because rent is so high that they have to look at all these other models. So I just want to mention that while we're interested in that concept, we also know that if our rental rates are very cheap, even for single housing, then let's just people can have a house instead of an apartment. That's something that's still a reality in Albuquerque. That is not a reality in a lot of these other cities, you know, that have all of these gentrification challenges that we just don't have as much of right now.
Thank you. We have a question here from Marissa Adamas at KOAT, and this one's about defunding the police in Albuquerque. Seeing other cities like LA and Minneapolis, have you thought more about reappropriating some of those funds to other programs where we need more resources, rather than more police and the militarization of communities of color? Also, would you call to remove APD from our APS schools?
So there's a lot in there in questions, in some of those questions. As a reminder, let's see, to try and break out some of those. The EPD is not really in our schools. So at their request, sometimes I know we have a resource officer at maybe 2 schools. But just as a reminder, in comparison to other cities, EPD has not been in our schools for a long time, with the exception, I think, of 2 schools. So, anyway, just a reminder that we're in a little different place than other cities there. With respect to the other aspects of the question around funding and so forth in APD, we're absolutely looking at this. And I think for us, as in a lot of these challenges, we want to really understand Albuquerque's path. Because as a reminder, we are in a very different place than other cities around the country, especially on this front. Because if you look at things that we've been doing, like trying to decriminalize the interaction between civilians and law enforcement, we're actually trying, and we want to do more of this, to have like a social worker show up instead of an officer. So in that regard, like we've been defunding for a while. And so similarly too, we're trying to have more unarmed officers or unarmed folks. And that includes like our coast team and some of our other civilian supports. And so this is definitely something that we're looking at, and we're actually hoping that, I think in the next week or two, we're going to have a lot more on this, because what's happening might actually help us do some of the things we've been trying to do for a couple of years. And I do also want to highlight the definitions kind of are important in a sense that whether it's defund or deinvest or decriminalize, it's about also upstream investments in things like poverty, in communities of color, in youth, in addiction, and in homelessness, even what we're talking about here today. And so for us, that's what we've been working on, and we actually have been doing that. I want to do more of it and do it faster, and so I'd stay tuned for some more on that.
Thank you. We have one more from the downtown Albuquerque news. Peter Rice says he's run into several people who are absolutely incredulous about the idea that a relatively small amount of money every month could make a difference between being housed or not. But the report seems to indicate that the small increases make a big difference for the homeless population. What does that tipping point look like in the real world?
It's a very good question about sort of the tipping point for homeless folks and their income. That's probably a good one for Carol or Lisa, if you want to. Okay, come on up. We got your.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I mean, we know that if we provide some funding to help folks with low incomes pay the rent, that is often enough to basically help people experiencing homelessness get into housing and keep that housing. So if you think, I'm making up a number a little bit here, but the average or sort of fair market rent for 1-bedroom apartment is maybe $800. Household contributes 30% of their income towards that rent, and then the voucher pays for the rest. That's a relatively small amount of money when compared to the cost of someone just remaining homeless. Often when people are experiencing homelessness, they're heavy utilizers of emergency rooms, detox facilities, inpatient hospitalization, even jail, because sometimes folks do commit infractions because they're living on the streets that they would avoid if they were in housing. So it is a very good point. It's far less expensive for us to help folks just get into housing and keep their housing than it is for us to allow them to remain homeless. It is also less expensive to provide housing than it is to operate an emergency shelter for people experiencing homelessness as well.
Okay, anything else?
Yes, we have one here from Maida at Univision. She says, I know that in Albuquerque there is a lot of help for people without a social security number. However, when it comes to housing, many residents without a social security number and in poverty still don't qualify for this help. Are there any other options?
The question is about folks who don't have a social security number and the help that's available. As a reminder, anything that is city driven, we do not require a social security number for. For better or worse, the federal government does have a control over much of the funds that flow through HUD, for example, and so they do have that requirement. But again, that's a federal requirement that we really can't change.
That's it for the questions today.
All right, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.